Let us pray. At the beginning of this week, we ask you, Father, to renew and strengthen in us the awareness of our duty and privilege as members of this legislature. We ask you also in your divine providence to bless and protect the Assembly and the province we are elected to serve. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Minister of Recreation and Parks.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and to the members of the Legislative Assembly a 4-member sports exchange delegation from Alberta's sister province in the Republic of Korea, Gangwon. The delegation, who are seated in your gallery, Mr. Speaker, signed a sport exchange earlier today which recognizes the mutual friendship and cooperation of our provinces and our countries and promotes improvement in sports. I would ask that each member of the delegation rise as I call his name and that members of the Legislative Assembly hold their recognition until I am finished. The delegation members are Mr. Cho, Director General of Planning and Management, and he was formerly Mayor of Wonju and other cities in Korea for 11 years. He is the delegation leader. Mr. Sim, Subheads of the Sports Section, Mr. Chong, Managing Director of the Office of the World Jamboree Support, and I may add that in 1991 the Boy Scout World Jamboree will be held in Gangwon Province. And Mr. Nam, Assistant Director of Kanwan Veterinary Services Lab. He was also the interpreter, as he is now, for the Kanwan delegation during the visit in the 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary. I would ask that all members join with me in extending a very warm welcome to the Legislative Assembly.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
Member for Banff Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 93, the petitions for private bills which have been received by the Assembly have been taken under consideration by me as the Chairman of the Private Bills Committee. And all of the petitions received have complied with Standing Orders 86 and 89, with the exception of the following. The petition of the Edmonton General Grey Nuns Hospital for the Edmonton General Grey Nuns Hospital Amendment Act 1989, and the petition of Jerry Dan Kovacs for the Jerry Dan Kovacs Legal Articles Act. The Private Bills Committee, Mr. Speaker, has had these 2 petitions under consideration and recommends to the Assembly that the deadline for completing advertising pursuant to Standing Order 89 be extended to July 18th, 1989, in respect of these 2 petitions to enable them to be considered. Mr. Speaker, I request the concurrence of the Assembly in this recommendation.
All those in favor of concurrence, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
The Deputy Premier, followed by the member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill number 11, the Senatorial Selection Act. This being a money bill, Her Honour, the Honourable the Lieutenant Governor, having been informed of the contents of this bill, recommends the same to the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, this bill is substantially the bill which was presented as Bill number 1 to the last session of the Legislature on February the 17th of this year. Amendments have been made, which honourable members will be apprised of, primarily to make the bill more compatible with the option of providing an election process in conjunction with the municipal election procedures to take place this October.
The Honourable Deputy Premier has moved first reading of Bill number 11, Senatorial Selection Act. Those members in favour of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 11, Senatorial Selection Act, introduced by the Honorable Mr. Horsman, is now read a first time.
Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill 248, standing in my name, an act to amend the Limitation of Actions Act. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to facilitate the recovery of large sums of money wrongfully extracted by the banks from borrowers.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona has moved first reading to Bill 248, an act to amend the Limitation of Actions Act number 2. Those in favor of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
It is actually number 3. It's wrongly printed in the... it's the third bill of that name. Thank you.
Parliamentary Council, table.
Bill number 248, an act to amend the Limitations of Actions Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Mr. Wright, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the annual report of the Automobile Insurance Board for the year 1988.
Minister of Economic Development and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to file with the Assembly copies of a news release which I issued earlier today concerning the new Alberta Capital Loan Guarantee Program and the Alberta Small Business Interest Shielding Program. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to file with the Assembly the response to motion number 173, which, by the way, is already public material.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Edmonton Strathcona, followed by the Minister of Economic Development and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, may I introduce to you and through you to other members of the Assembly two special guests in the public gallery, Mr. Larry Whaley and Ms. Dorothy Mandy, who is Mr. Whaley's partner in the Borrowers Advocate Limited.
Minister of Economic Development and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure, sir, to introduce to you and to members of the Legislative Assembly 72 students from the Mills Haven School in Sherwood Park. They're joined with Gwen Ditzian, Eddie Cameron, and Wayne Mays. I regret that I was unable to have a photograph with them, but I'd like to leave them with the assurance that we are going to get them each an individual photograph, and I would ask if they would rise to receive a warm welcome of the Legislative Assembly.
Member for Edmonton Beverley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleasure for me today to introduce to you and to members of the Legislative Assembly 39 students from Belmont Elementary School located in the city of Edmonton Beverley. The students are accompanied today by their teachers, Mr. Wadinsky and Ms. Paziuk. They are also accompanied by their parent, Ms. Wolanski. I'd ask them to rise and receive the welcome of this Assembly.
Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to introduce to you and the other members of the Assembly this afternoon a group of 23 students from St. Clement School in the constituency of Edmonton Millwoods. They're here this afternoon with their teacher, Mr. Len Tanis. They're in the public gallery, and I'd ask them to rise now and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Minister of Education.
Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly a friend and colleague, Mr. Harry Chomick from Vegreville. Mr. Chomick is serving as the past president of the Alberta School Trustees Association, and I'd ask him to rise and receive the warm welcome of members.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct my question to the Minister of Forestry, Lands and Wildlife. Mr. Speaker, the Premier of British Columbia says that the Alberta government is engaged in a bidding war to attract forestry companies to Alberta. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Van der Zam's comments reflect a concern of many Albertans, Mr. Speaker, that this government has put up too much of taxpayers' dollars to get these projects going, Mr. Speaker, over $1 billion, over $1 billion in loan guarantees, grants, and other assistance, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these companies need this virgin timber, and people are wondering why, because they're going to make the big profits, why we had to give over $1 billion of corporate welfare to these companies, Mr. Speaker. And my question flowing from that is, why is it necessary to give $1 billion to these companies? In other words, why are we involving ourselves in corporate welfare of this magnitude?
Right on.
Mr. Speaker, the overall development of the forestry resource in Alberta is one that we aggressively went out and looked for around the world, because we have a resource here that is a resource that is a quality resource that wasn't being utilized. In the companies that come forward, Mr. Speaker, there are certain advantages and disadvantages for locating in Alberta. The advantage to locating here is the resource that we have, a stable political climate, a stable labor force, and all of those factors that took that into consideration. Some of the negatives were, of course, is we don't have a seaport at Banff or St. Albert, and there are infrastructure costs that are difficult. These projects could have gone anywhere in the world, Mr. Speaker, and we attracted them here, not with subsidies, but with infrastructure assistance that has also public use. I might use the Daishawa project as one example, a bridge that was put in that cost $20 million, $10 million by us, $10 million by them, because of the public use aspect. And as far as the guarantees, Mr. Speaker, we aren't putting up guarantees that are spending taxpayers' money. It's a guarantee that's secured, and we get a fee for that guarantee. So, Mr. Speaker, it is a good business deal all the way around for Albertans, as well as the company for now and in the future.
Mr. Speaker,
Another one.
the reality is, for those loan guarantees, we don't share in the profits,
That's
so it's
right.
not that great a deal, Mr. Speaker.
Here, here.
My question is, because the minister talked about the infrastructure, saying that they are going to make the profits, why is it that we have to pay for the infrastructure? Why aren't the companies paying for the infrastructure? Why didn't he negotiate these, Mr. Speaker?
Right on.
Mr. Speaker, a significant portion of the infrastructure, and I'm talking about outside the plant gate, is provided by the companies in the forest management agreement, the roads and that are necessary, and other factors. One of the parts of the infrastructure that we had to spend the entire amount on was the rail. And because we're a landlocked province and rail is important, and we couldn't get CP or CN to put in the rail, we had to make those moves, or else the mills would not have located here. But we have no apologies, Mr. Speaker, and we want to make sure in all of our negotiations we had with each one of these companies that we didn't want any accusation to be able to be leveled at Alberta that we were unfairly subsidizing our industry in any way that could be accused and made into a countervailable issue. So, Mr. Speaker, each one of these projects, as you look at it, you can't say in any way that we were putting the taxpayers of this province at risk. On the other side, Mr. Speaker, frankly, what we're doing is creating jobs in the future for many of the Albertans that didn't have that opportunity in northern Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, what we have to do is take the minister's word here, the minister's word, Mr. Speaker, that this was the best possible deal. If that's the case then, and he's proud of this deal, why doesn't he release the secret reports that they've had with the minister so we can make a choice about it?
Mr. Speaker, I'm getting sick and tired of hearing all the comments about secret reports. The information that...
Just relax.
The woodpeckers are at it again, Mr. Speaker. Frankly, the reports and everything, the information that's there, it's clear and in black and white. If you want to know the questions, ask them. And we're happy to provide. The information is out there with respect to the infrastructure and the financial assistance that was provided. It was made on the date that the date that the projects were announced. There's nothing hidden. There's no secret meetings or anything that would be secretive, contrary to what they're trying to outline for the House.
Okay, second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, to the Deputy Premier. Mr. Speaker, we're having the Western Premiers Conference, and I expect that we'll be talking about high interest rate policy, Mr. Speaker. And I want to point out, since the current Premier took office with this government, the Bank of Canada rate has increased by 40%, from 8.77 to 12.31.
What a check.
Mr. Speaker, now the government told us in its budget speech that, and I quote, has repeatedly stressed its opposition to the high interest rate policy of the Bank of Canada. Mr. Speaker, Albertans want to know where this government was during the federal election when they could have had some impact on issues like this. And Mr. Speaker, during the provincial election, I saw the Premier holding up his fist as he went down to Ottawa to get TK'd in the first round, Mr. Speaker. My question is, because the government has said that they're against the high interest rate policy, why has this government been so absolutely ineffective in dealing with the federal government on this important issue?
What's happening out there, Ray?
Mr. Speaker, obviously the issue of high interest rates is one which has affected Alberta and has affected Canadians very adversely. We have made it very clear that the policy, which we believe was wrong, was made to deal with an overheated Toronto area economy in Ontario. And I might add that that was not an economy which extended very far out into Ontario. So many other parts of Ontario were adversely impacted as well. Our Premier sought and obtained the unanimous support of all premiers of Canada in opposition to the high interest rate policies of the federal government. And we will continue during the course of the next 2 days in our meetings in Camrose to hammer home that point. We do not set interest rate policies, however, and for the Honourable Leader of the Opposition in the preamble to his question to suggest that somehow or the other our Premier was responsible for a 40% increase in the rates of interest is so ludicrous and so stretching the point that it hardly warrants an answer, but I will give it to him anyway. We will fight and continue to fight against that policy which we believe was wrong and harmful, whether it emanated from a progressive Conservative government or one in which the Liberals and the NDP conspired together against the province of Alberta and the NEP.
Mr. Speaker, to this minister, during the federal election, this government sat on its hind legs and didn't do anything when they could have, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
And the point is they can say all the fighting that they want. The fact is it's been an abysmal failure. Other than rhetoric, what concrete political action is this government going to do in the next little while to put some political pressure on the Mulroney government?
Stop using
Just answer the question, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Honourable Member for Vegreville, as is usual, tries to shout down the person who is answering a question. And the Honourable Member for Vegreville thinks it's funny or cute, so let him go ahead. But the fact of the matter is that I would like to have the opportunity of answering a question without this constant interruption from the member from Vegreville, who is the worst offender.
Worst offender.
The fact of the matter is...
No doubt.
Oh, he's even outdoing the member for Westlock Sturgeon. And I have no idea, Mr. Speaker, why he wants to assume those laurels. But in any event, the answer I have already given. We will, during the course of the next few days, in Camrose, working with the other premiers in the spirit of cooperation, move on from there to make our views known to Ottawa that the policy of the federal government has adopted is wrong. And I might add this, Mr. Speaker, to that point. It is obvious that this message is getting through to such an elite body as the Finance Committee of the House of Commons, where that committee, led by a Conservative, I might add, from Toronto area, has taken the same position that the premiers have taken. Certainly they are listening to what we are saying, and we will continue to make that point clear on behalf of all Albertans.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Wilson made it clear what he thought of them, Mr. Speaker.
Of his own committee.
And if this government wants to move beyond rhetoric, Mr. Speaker, if this government wants to move beyond rhetoric, would it, as Mr. Nystrom did, our finance critic, demand the resignation of the governor of the Bank of Canada, Mr. Snow, if he doesn't change his policies? Would they do that, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, I know the Honourable Leader of the Opposition likes to get excited during question period, but the fact of the matter is the Governor of the Bank of Canada is Mr. Crow, not Mr. Snow. But nonetheless, that's just a matter...
The difference is black and white.
A slip of the tongue, Mr. Speaker. The demand for the resignation of the Governor of the Bank of Canada has come from many quarters. We will see whether or not that would be a reasonable and rational solution to come out of the meeting in Camrose, although, quite frankly, I would think that our message is best put this way: from government and governments to the Government of Canada. And it would then be for the Government of Canada to decide whether or not the Governor of the Bank of Canada is appropriately carrying out his responsibilities.
Leader of the Liberal Party, member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, on Friday evening, two citizens who have been on the steps of the legislature for a number of days and who have been complaining about actions by the Workmen's Compensation Board, who were peacefully demonstrating, were arrested and jailed. They were denied bail and were taken to the Edmonton Remand Center for the remainder of the weekend. The really unbelievable part of this story is that they were denied visitors because apparently they hadn't made arrangements during the week for visitors to visit them. My question to the Attorney General is this: would he look into the circumstances of this kind of a paltry charge where bail is denied to citizens and forcing them to stay in a remand center the whole of a weekend? Would he examine the situation to see if something better could be done?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be pleased to look into the situation. Every accused that's brought before the court has an application for bail. It is the independence of the judiciary that hears that application and metes out the penalty, not the Attorney General, but I'll certainly look into the case.
Mr. Speaker, this is surely a policy matter. I wonder if the Attorney General would examine the regulations that pertain to visits at a remand center whereby a wife or family are denied the right to see a spouse or a father or a close kin in the way this matter developed. That's surely policy that you're...
Mr. Speaker, I'd have to refer that to the Solicitor General. The Solicitor General has total jurisdiction over any of our penal institutions.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware of the fact that these two people were denied access to these two people by visitors, but I will make an inquiry and advise the honourable member accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to know whether it's going to be a continued policy on the Minister of Public Works' part to continue to be as draconic as he has been and jail people for peaceful demonstrations in front of this Legislative Assembly. Is he going to continue being as rough with...
Order, please. One question's enough. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that charges were laid over the weekend against two individuals who had violated a statute of the province of Alberta. Those charges were laid, in my understanding, Mr. Speaker, by the City of Edmonton Police Department, and there was absolutely no involvement whatsoever, by the Minister of Public Works Supplying Services in this matter. Mr. Speaker, those charges, I repeat, were laid by the City of Edmonton Police Department. As I understanding, a date has been set aside for hearing in court for the trial.
Member for Olds, Didsbury, followed by Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We touched on this issue very briefly a few moments ago, but when the Premier announced the interest shielding and capital loan guarantee program several months ago, there was mixed reactions in my constituency. In light of the Minister's announcement a few moments ago of these two programs, I would like him, the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, to address these concerns. First of all, just what impact does the Minister feel these two business programs are going to have on business when business loan rates are only at 13.5% today, and they have to be in excess of 14% even to be able to access those programs?
Mr. Speaker, we feel very confident that they are going to inject security, predictability, and a real sense of stability within the small business community. The reason we announced these programs, Mr. Speaker, was to ensure that they did have that predictability for a period of 2 years. I should point out to the honourable member and all honourable members of the Legislative Assembly that even though the prime rate is 13.5%, the borrowing by the banks exceeds that by anywhere from 1.5 to 2 percentage points. So there is already a level of protection within the program that we announced this morning as a follow-up from our election commitments, the speech from the throne, and the budget debate, whereby we want to inject stability within the small business community.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Then can I ask the Minister just why he feels obligated to pick up what clearly should be the responsibility of the federal government in issues of this kind?
Mr. Speaker, unlike other parties in this Legislative Assembly, we don't only believe in rhetoric, we're going to follow through with our commitments. Honourable members opposite can yell and shout about what we are doing. We indicated, as the Deputy Premier has indicated, a forceful position on interest rate policy. We acknowledge that we have turned the economic corner within this province. We recognize that we led the other provinces in economic growth, and we want to make sure that that growth is maintained, and that is why we have come forward with these 2 substantial programs for the small business community so that we can continue with that strong economic climate within the province of Alberta.
Right. Yes, Mr. Speaker. Many times we've heard from this minister and others just how buoyant our current economy is here in Alberta, and I'd like to know just what impact he feels that these programs will have on business and growth development over and above what is currently in place.
Questions? Mr. Speaker, we are delighted with the buoyancy of the economic activity that we experienced last year. As I indicated, we led all other provinces. It is projected that again this year we are going to lead all other provinces as it relates to economic growth. And that is why we introduced these programs, so that we can have that stability, that assurance being left with the small business community that when he projects as to what his spending will be over the next number of years, he has that assurance that he will have that level interest rate in which he has to pay for his capital demands.
Member for Edmonton Strathcona, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark, then Rocky Mountain House.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs. Recent court cases, Mr. Speaker, have shown rather clearly that millions, perhaps billions, of dollars have been unlawfully extracted by way of unlawfully charged interest by the banks from Canadian citizens, a sizable proportion of whom are in this province, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Minister is, what is the Minister doing about this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I clearly, and nobody on this side of the House, are friends of overcharging individuals for bank interest or other services that would be unfair or incorrect. The topic which the honourable member raises is within federal jurisdiction under the Bank Act, if that is what he's talking about. Perhaps he could clarify in his supplementary.
It's exactly what I'm talking about, Mr. Speaker, and while the Bank Act is under federal jurisdiction, the Limitation of Actions Act is not. So my question to the Minister is, since this is the almost sole impediment in most cases to recovery, what steps has the Department taken, or is it going to take, or has the Minister in mind to amend that Act to enable this?
Mr. Speaker, with respect to the issue which I believe the honourable member is alluding to, the Department is more than willing at any time to meet with individuals who feel that they've been wrongly dealt with through our consumer affairs offices around the province. With respect to the act that the member addresses, I'll be interested in seeing what he has introduced in the House today, but it is my understanding that the legal judgment with regards to the 6-year time period that is attached to that act is unclear in terms of whether or not it applies from the date an individual in fact becomes aware of an alleged breach of their particular circumstance, or whether it begins from the date when the transaction took place or when the contract was signed. So the results of that case, the results of that legal judgment will be important with regards to whether or not there's consideration given to changing this act.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can we then expect from the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs an undertaking that he will clear up that lack of clarity in the law, which I agree exists, so that the citizens of Alberta who have been the victims of this reverse stick-up by the bank of its customers can get their just due?
Mr. Speaker, in my previous answer, I spoke to the particular feelings that I have with regards to that act, though I might add that there is another minister who has responsibility for that particular area, and he may wish to augment the answer in this regard. The honourable member can certainly be assured that if it's clear there have been problems for individuals that are not properly dealt with, if it's clear that there are parts of our legislation which hamper and which do not, in fact, allow for a consumer to properly progress with redress, claiming redress as a result of improper actions on the part of a financial institution, then we will look at legislation and make appropriate changes, and I'll make such recommendations to my colleagues who may be responsible for that.
Edmonton Meadowlark, Rocky Mountain House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, two senior employees of the Forestry Department are presidents, respectively, of two private sector forestry organizations lobbying for forestry development. My question is to the Minister of Forestry. How could it possibly be coincident that two senior employees of his department are not just members, but are in fact presidents of two significant private sector forestry organizations lobbying for forestry development in this province?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'm surprised that the opposition would raise the question of public servants' involvement in activities. The other day they were encouraging them to be involved. In this case, the Alberta Forestry Association has been around for some 40 years, and during those 40 years they have made presentations in schools, and a number of the people that are involved, of course, are foresters, and a number of them are in my department. During my term as minister, I encourage people to become involved, and certainly in this case, neither encouraged nor discouraged, but I'm happy that they are involved. The association is a private association, and there's that opportunity within there, and hopefully the cream rises to the top, so I would assume because they have risen to senior positions, it's because of their competence level, so I compliment them for their efforts.
Could the minister please confirm that at this time, given the sensitivity of the forestry development issue in this province, the roles of these two employees are at worst a conflict of interest and at best a demonstration of extremely poor judgment?
Mr. Speaker, no, I don't believe it's a conflict of interest, and I don't believe it's poor judgment on their part either. There has been times in the past that there has been individuals that have been in my department that have been in senior positions, and then the next time around when they have elections, it's changed. And in this point in time, to try and cast any aspersions to the Alberta Forestry Association and the excellent work they do, that there's some kind of a lobby effort, just is not true.
My third question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of the Environment. Given that the Forestry Department supervises the forestry management agreements for pulp mill projects, for example, in the north, how can the Minister of the Environment have any confidence whatsoever that in light of this clear conflict of interest, environmental compliance under these agreements will be done properly and objectively?
Well, Mr. Speaker, to answer the question again and again and again, the assurances will be done under the environmental impact assessment process, which is being reviewed and which is being strengthened, and hopefully when all is said and done, we will have in place projects that not only relate to forestry but relate to the pulp mill developments that will be in place to abide by the highest standards in the world. It's as simple as that.
Rocky Mountain House, followed by Edmonton Avonmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has been following the wishes of its people and leading the country in Senate reform. Of course, one of those reforms is the method by which the senators are selected. To the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, have you been in contact, or has this government been in contact with the municipal authorities as to their input and their thoughts about holding the election on the same day as the municipal elections?
Mr. Speaker, since the bill was introduced back in February, there were discussions undertaken with municipal authorities as to whether or not the senatorial selection process could be carried out in conjunction with municipal elections. As a result of those discussions, there have been substantial, or a number of changes, not substantial in content, but a number to improve the Act, to make sure that, for example, in case of Edmonton, where voting machines are being instituted for the first time, that we'd be able to make the Act compatible with that type of procedure. In addition to that, on Friday, I spoke to a conference of municipal elected officials in Red Deer, brought the subject up and received support there, and met on Saturday with the president of the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association, who assured me that while they wouldn't like to see this as a regular process, they recognize that it would be a possibility during the course of the elections which take place this fall, and it is an option that the government continues to include in the legislation, and we would think that the most recent discussion by the AUMA and with the county and municipal councillors that I had on Friday would indicate that there's support there for proceeding in the way the Act would propose to do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the same minister, have any of the logistics been worked out? That is, things like, are we going to use the same poll? What happens if there's acclamation in the municipal election?
Mr. Speaker, that indeed has been taken under consideration, and the possibility of elections not being required in municipalities in Alberta as a result of acclamation procedures are provided for in the legislation. And as well, in the particular case of the City of Lloydminster, which holds its municipal elections in conjunction with Saskatchewan, a provision has been made for a poll to be undertaken there under the authority and under the direction of the Chief Electoral Office, should this option of going for the senatorial election process at the same time municipal elections be the option which is ultimately chosen. Of course, we'll have to wait the outcome of debate in this Assembly as to the passage of the legislation in time for that to take place.
Thank you. Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Calgary Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last week in this legislature, I described an incident wherein the police had failed to lay charges against a man who had assaulted a woman in the course of what was termed a domestic dispute. At that time, the Solicitor General attempted to defend his inaction by stating that, and I quote, "In every circumstance, the police must have available to them proper witnesses and testimony in which they can properly prosecute to the charge." My question then is to the Solicitor General. In light of his statement of the requirement for proper witnesses, is the minister then saying that as long as men confine their assaults on women to the privacy of their own homes, this government will not be demanding that police lay charges?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, that is categorical nonsense. That is not what I said at all. What I said was that the police required evidence to present to a court which would back up a charge, and that does continue to be the case in this instance.
Mr. Speaker, I would suggest the Solicitor General read Hansard. In the case I outlined last week, the victim was in fact able to produce a medical certificate attesting to the fact that she had been beaten. Given that the police in that case still refuse to lay charges, will the minister please tell this legislature the specific degree of injury that a woman must suffer before her word is considered good enough for the police to lay charges?
Order, please, Solicitor General. The difficulty of the question is we're getting precious close to legal opinions and interpretations, and that is not the directional question period. No, supplementary Edmonton Avonmore. asking legal opinions according to Beauchesne or our own standing orders. Edmonton Avonmore on a supplementary, thank you.
We're talking policy.
Avonmore, not Edmonton
With all due
Kingsway.
respect, I suggest the Solicitor General read the Criminal Code of Canada.
That's right.
Given that 1978 research indicates that in 85% of spousal homicides, police had prior knowledge of wife assault, and that men charged and convicted of assault are 40 to 70% less likely to repeat the offense, will the minister instruct the police to lay charges in all incidents of spousal assault?
The police have already been instructed. It is their job on an ongoing 24-hour-a-day base to bring offenders of any law, particularly the criminal code, to court. This they will continue to do. However, Mr. Speaker, a mere document presented by somebody or anybody as to what may or may not have been an injury proves nothing other than that an injury has occurred, and the question in court is still who created the injury. That is what must be answered and evidence given.
Calgary Northwest, called Calgary Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, via rail cuts are likely going to be implemented before the end of the summer. And the Tourism Industry Association of Alberta has come up with a policy document. Their number one policy is, and I'd like to read it and quote it, Mr. Speaker, is that the government of Alberta work vigorously to ensure that passenger rail service is continued and upgraded to be more viable, unquote. A previous study has shown that the Alberta lines are economically viable. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Why hasn't this minister organized the municipalities and other interest groups along the two rail lines in question to lobby the federal government to retain via rail service through Edmonton and Calgary?
Mr. Speaker, I indicated to a number of the opposition members in this Legislative Assembly on a number of occasions that we have actively pursued this, both with the federal minister and our departmental officials have actively pursued it with individuals within the National Transportation Agency also. We are working in a very forceful manner to make sure that those lines are maintained.
My second question then is to the same minister. Why has this government not undertaken their own study, a recent study, to show what the economic benefits to the province will be and is provided by these lines currently? Why wait for the federal?
Mr. Speaker, it was indicated in the House again some time ago that quite some time ago studies were done jointly with a number of departments within this government as to the economic impacts that the rail lines do have on the province and the tourism industry. I must admit to the honourable member that there is conflicting figures as to the amount of economic impact that it does have with studies that have been taken by both ourselves, the economic development group within the city of Edmonton, and various municipalities along the line itself. We know that there is a significant economic impact, and that's why, as I've indicated in the past, we are going to do everything within our power to make sure that those lines are maintained.
Well, my third question then is that the minister has given us indication that some commitments have been made. My question is what commitments have been made, to whom, and when will they be implemented?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member is aware, and I'm not sure what he is referring to by the way of commitments, I've indicated to him, and I'm happy to reinforce it, that we're going to do everything within our power to convince the federal government that those lines are essential to the economic well-being to this province. If the honourable member has any suggestions as to how we can be more forceful in pursuing the interests of the province of Alberta with our federal counterparts, I'm happy to take those suggestions. I would also suggest to him, though, that it is under federal jurisdiction, and I'd be curious to know as to whether he has made any representation to our federal counterparts.
Member for Smoky Lake, followed by Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The coal industry is a significant part of Alberta's energy and is very important to specific communities in the western part of the province. Can the Ministry of Energy advise the House of the importance of the program that he announced on the weekend in conjunction with the Right Honourable Joe Clark?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for Smoky Lake makes an important point, and that is that the coal industry plays a very significant part of the Alberta economy, and we have very vast reserves here, notwithstanding our emphasis tend to lean towards oil and gas. I should point out that the federal government, along with the province of Alberta, has entered into a joint agreement with Smoky River Coal in the Grand Cache area, Mr. Speaker, to the tune of about $8.6 million that will deal with moving from the research stage into a pilot project that will deal with extracting coal at 20-foot thick seams that heretofore have only been able to be extracted at about 14 feet. It will also deal with a continuous conveyance of coal, Mr. Speaker, and I should say that this is an exciting technology, and if it's successful in the pilot project at Smoky River, it will have wide application and impact on the coal industry throughout the province of Alberta and other provinces in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Coal has been identified as a major source of sulfur dioxides, carbon dioxides, and other emissions which are particularly of an environmental concern. How are these environmental issues being addressed? And again, to the Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that the initiative by President Bush in the United States dealing with low SO2 emissions has a particular impact on low sulfur coal in this part of the province. In the Grand Cache area, particularly, Mr. Speaker, where the coal there has low sulfur impacts. I should say that, Mr. Speaker, the reasons for its attractiveness is because this low sulfur coal is in fact emits less SO2 than bunker C fuel oil, heating oil, and therefore it makes it more attractive into these particular markets. We would not say, Mr. Speaker, that it solves all of the problems on the environmental concerns for coal. There are still some concerns about CO2 emissions, and this low sulfur coal has higher levels of CO2 in the atmosphere than bunker C oil. But we have a number of projects going on in this province and other initiatives where we will be dealing with that aspect to try and make this particular coal more competitive and reduce the CO2 levels. So it's competitive not only in the Ontario market, Mr. Speaker, but in Asia Pacific as a whole.
Final supplementary is to the Minister of Energy as well, and that is, has this government any other initiatives or any other programs to promote the development of the coal industry in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, I'm surprised that the NDP would react in that way to this very important industry. This industry has been hurt in this province, and they have an MLA from the part of this province that should be asking these questions, and I think we should listen to the member for Smoky Lake ask these questions and the answers, Mr. Speaker. Should say, Mr. Speaker, there is an action committee on Western Canadian low sulfur coal to Ontario that makes up British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and the province of Ontario, along with the federal government. And we are looking at other initiatives. This government has $16 million committed over 4 years, Mr. Speaker, to deal with the competitive nature of coal. We have signed an agreement with the province of Alberta on moving from a tabletop experiment to put in a coal slurry, something that has been worked on for a number of years in this province, coal slurry through an oil pipeline. If we can continue to work hard, Mr. Speaker, and we will, we can, I believe, in the near future make Alberta coal competitive and a high utilization factor in the Ontario market. We have other initiatives, and I'll be discussing those in my estimates before this House sometime this month, Mr. Speaker.
Right on.
Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Solicitor General is no doubt aware of some of the circumstances surrounding the collapse of a now defunct chess tournament in Calgary. The province has lost $100,000, the City of Calgary another $70,000 of taxpayers' money, and many private creditors remain unpaid. Mr. Speaker, to the Solicitor General, will he confirm whether the RCMP are investigating the loss of this money to determine whether charges ought to be laid?
Mr. Speaker, I've heard the questions over the course of the last 10 days in this House or past week from the honourable member from Calgary, but the actual direction of prosecutions, investigations are not the prerogative of the Solicitor General, and I would ask that the Attorney General respond.
apologize with the page coming by and that I didn't catch the full import. If I could have the question again, please.
Mr. Speaker, I'm just wondering whether the RCMP are investigating whether the loss of this, investigating the loss of this money around the chess tournament in order to determine whether charges ought to be laid.
Mr. Speaker, I can't answer that directly as to whether there's an investigation going. Once the investigation is completed, it would come to the Attorney General on the recommendation of whatever investigating force for the determination as to whether there has been a breach. I can't advise that at this stage. I'm more than happy to look into it and get back to the member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. John Emer was the subject of an NBC documentary some months ago about an alleged multi-million-dollar scam in the United States. Given the fact that this same individual was a key participant in this proposed chess tournament in which public funds have gone missing, would the Attorney General agree with me or be satisfied as I am that a need exists for the RCMP to investigate?
If the honourable member has evidence that can show that in this particular instance, not on the basis of somebody's reputation or alleged reputation, that there is reason for an investigation that should be brought forward to the particular investigating body, be it the RCMP or if it's in securities, it's securities, and under that basis, an investigation would be undertaken. As the Attorney General, I do not have it in my power to tell the RCMP. That somebody would have to bring forward the evidence. I have not yet seen concrete evidence that would show that there is a reason for the investigation. If that can be brought forward, I'm sure the RCMP would be more than happy to do that.
Well, there's been plenty of questions raised, and I'd like the Attorney General to, given his answer so far, tell us how he responds to those members of the public that believe an investigation should take place. How does he convince them that their fears are groundless, or that in fact the RCMP are taking their fears seriously and are in fact responding?
Mr. Speaker, on the basis of the evidence that's been tabled in this Assembly, and on the basis of the information that is available in Hansard, I see nothing that is criminal. There may be some confusion in how an application was handled or how the parties were involved in that particular instance, but I see nothing on the surface. If there is something that can be brought forward that can show that there is a basis for a criminal investigation, such would be the case, and be more than happy.
Member for Stony Plain, followed by Calgary, McKnight, West Yellowhead, Cypress Redcliffe. Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, municipal legislation requires 30 days' notice before municipalities can implement tax penalties on July 1st. When I last asked about this issue, the minister assured this legislature that municipalities would not be required to dip into their own coffers. In light of this, Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of Education explain how municipalities that received school foundation program fund requisitions as late as June 5th are expected to collect the money after tax notices have been mailed out?
Well, Mr. Speaker, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, the order in council prescribing a 15.9 mill rate was passed by Cabinet on the 24th of May. Her Honor, the Honourable Lieutenant Governor, signed the order on May 25, and members of and information was provided to all municipalities on 31 May. Mr. Speaker, as I've said in this legislature as recently as June 16, I regret the delay in advising municipalities of this 0.4 point increase in the mill rate, but we will be expecting municipalities to provide those dollars to the School Foundation Program Fund in order for the provincial government to then be able to grant a 5.5% increase to all school boards across the province.
Time for question period has expired. May we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Stony Plain.
Given that the Minister's Department failed to notify the municipalities before their own May 1st deadline, will the Minister agree to refund the additional cost of collection, if not, in fact, rescind the proposal for the increased mill rate?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, are there any penalties for not remitting the funds to the provincial government on time? And if so, will the province forgive any late payments or any late payment penalties for municipalities which do not pay until next year when they can legitimately collect the taxes?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not aware of any municipality who would be late in providing those dollars, and I would expect that there would be no such late payment.
First, the Chair would like to extend congratulations to the Honourable Member for Meadowlark and his wife on the birth of their son, Grady Charles. Time for question period has expired. May we have unanimous consent to revert to the introduction of special guests? Opposed? Chair recognizes Drayton Valley, followed by Smoky River.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly about 40 young people from grade 5 and 6 at Alder Flats in the beautiful west country of Alberta, and they're accompanied here today by teachers Heather Brown and Jerry Geiger, and parents Gary Brown, Wendy Poudrier, and Joan Elmont. Would those people be kind enough to stand and receive the traditional welcome of this House, please?
Smoky River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to introduce to you and through you, the members of the House, 68 bright-eyed students from the École Heritage School at Jean-Côté near the banks of the mighty Smoky River. They are accompanied by 4 teachers, Dominic Jean, Dolores Nolette, Larry Lynch, and Sophie Savoy. Parents, Lucette Bruneau, Patrice Savoy, and Nicole Lepage. And bus drivers, Robert Despens and Robert Boissenois. I'd certainly like to ask the House to recognize the group. I'd like them to stand and be recognized by the House.
So,
Government motions. Motion number 9. Honourable Mr. Horsman.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased today to move motion number 9, which would proclaim July 2nd and 3rd of this year as days of peace and friendship between our province and the state of Montana. It is significant that this motion should come forward this year in view of the fact that our only border state, the state of Montana, is celebrating its centennial. This event, while it's actually being held throughout the year, the actual day of celebration will be called Admission Day, and that is of November the 8th. And there will be a wide variety of gala events that day, including a statewide ringing of bells at 10:40 a.m. and the Centennial Ball hosted by the Governor. Now, this is only a small part of the celebrations which will take place. I should point out to the Assembly, Mr. Speaker, that a similar resolution was moved by the state of Montana in 1987, a proclamation issued then by the Governor of the state then, Ted Schwinden, who was a very good friend of the province of Alberta and who was a guest of ours on many occasions. Mr. Speaker, that particular request had come to us, and unfortunately we were unable to comply because of timing that particular year in getting the resolution before the Assembly, but this year I would certainly want it to come forward and be accepted by members of the Assembly. I also note, Mr. Speaker, that the same year, 2 years ago, a similar motion was introduced into the House of Commons, and there supported